Welcome to our Cyberwise Chats, where we talk about the challenges of raising and teaching digital kids. I'm Diana Graber, author of Raising Humans in a Digital World and founder of Cyberwise and Cybercivics. Join every episode with Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who's the director of the Media Psychology Research Center. Our always lively conversations tackle topics like cyberbullying, screen time, TikTok, and everything in between. We've got some great guests and promise each chat will give you the tips, tricks, and confidence you need to help kids use technology safely and wisely.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think it's afternoon for just about everyone here because we're on the West Coast, so we're the last people to have an afternoon. So welcome. As you know by now, I'm Diana Graber. I'm the author of Raising Humans in a Digital World and founder of Cybercivics and Cyberwise. Here, as always, with Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who's the director of the Media Psychology Research Center, and CJ Lindsay, who is our resident children's media expert. He's worked with all the guys, Cartoon Network, etc. So he's going to not only be helping us understand what kids are watching, but manning the chat box today. So if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to put them in there. And I'm really excited to welcome our special guest today, Sue Scheff. I've known Sue for a long time. She is one of the originals in the safety internet space. She has done so much work, written a bunch of books that you've probably heard of: Google Bomb, Shame Nation. She's the founder of helpyourteens.com. And I'd really like to start by Sue telling her personal story because it's really interesting how she got into this field in the first place. So Sue, take it away.
Well, I'm going to keep it really abbreviated because the topic that we're going to talk about today is so much more important. In 2001, I created Parents Universal Resource Experts because of my own experiences of trying to find a therapeutic boarding school for my good teen making some really poor choices, struggling with depression, low self-worth, a lot of what parents are going through today. We exhausted our local resources and we needed help. The program we placed her in ended up being abusive, deceptive, neglectful, and my daughter suffered the consequences because they lied to us. I won a big lawsuit back then, and this was way back in the late 90s. And that was the demise of that program, as well as the 20-something programs that was affiliated with that organization that ran that program. From there, I worked with 3 big law firms that represented hundreds of kids that were harmed in those programs. What was really interesting about this big part of my life was during all that litigation, the corporation that I took down hired someone to actually go online and virtually attack me. And it was the first time that we ever heard of this online destruction of someone. And I was a victim of internet defamation, where this woman that was hired to attack me by this organization came after me with, online harassment. Cyberbullying wasn't even coined back then. So it was bullying, harassment, shaming, trolls, people impersonating me. It was literally out there to destroy me and the organization that I had started to start educating families on this big business of teen help out there, because I really felt that I wanted other families to learn from my experiences. So through that, I not only won the first lawsuit, which helped the demise of all those abusive programs, I won the very first internet defamation lawsuit back in 2006, which was a landmark case back then. It set precedence of the $11.3 million lawsuit, which, that was my second book of Google Bomb. And then from there, that's how I became such a huge proponent of cyberbullying prevention. And I truly understand what young kids are going through, because as an adult, I feel that I barely got out of it alive. I was 40-something years old way back at the time when it was happening to me. And I really felt like the whole wide world was either laughing at me. I barely emotionally sustained it. I mean, when you are cyberbullied online, it's the depths of you just feel so helpless and hopeless. And that's what these young people are feeling, because as an adult, I didn't feel like I was going to escape it. So I know how these young people feel.
So that's a great intro to really our topic today, which we're going to talk about screen time. And before you get depressed in 5 minutes, I just really start by underscoring that, cyberbullying is not happening to every child out there, but we don't want it to happen to any children. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at what they're doing with their screen time. So sort of as a little opening, there's some really interesting research that just came out from Common Sense Media about 2 months ago. And they found that screen time is up about 17% for tweens and teens since the start of the pandemic. No surprise, our kids needed their screens for so many reasons during this time. Anyway, that 17% doesn't account for time spent attending school or doing homework. That growth grew from, here's some numbers, you can remember these, for tweens from 4 hours and 44 minutes a day to 5 hours and 33 minutes a day. For teens, it went from 7 hours and 22 minutes a day to about 8.5 hours per day. In short, it's a much faster increase in just the last 2 years than we've seen in the previous 4 years. So kids are spending a lot more time on their screens, no surprise. So we're going to start with the big picture first. Pam, how much is too much?
Well, first of all, let's describe what we're talking about, because when people hear the word screens, they automatically think, social media. But when Common Sense Media and most researchers are measuring screens, they're measuring all screens. They're measuring television, they're measuring YouTube, they're measuring all of these things, not just Instagram, not just Facebook. So it's really important to keep that in mind. The last 5 years of research, the researchers have really worked hard to try and pick apart what does screen time actually mean, because they're discovering that there's a big difference in what you're using and how you're using it that makes almost more difference on your well-being than how much. Now, that being said, obviously balance is key, but we really need to start parsing about what it is that people are doing when they're online, and recognize that screen time can be triggered by a lot of other things. There are several research studies showing that parental stress predicts child screen time. Not surprising, if you're a kid and you're in a house with a lot of stress, a screen is a perfect place to hide out. So we have to be very careful that we're not extrapolating something from a number like screen time without digging a little bit deeper and getting underneath it. Can a kid have a park? Is there any place they can go? Do they have any parental supervision? So it's all of these things that go into the measures that make that really important. But let me just leave you with the Goldilocks theory, right? Which which is that no screen time isn't good for teens, right? It leaves them isolated. Too much screen time isn't good for teens. It leaves them, overburdened and withdrawn. So there's a sweet spot in the middle, depending upon how your teen is using it, their maturity, but it is an important way of them navigating their social space.
Yeah, and I will say with that Goldilocks hypothesis you just mentioned, that sweet spot, they found it's somewhere around 2.5 hours per day. That varies depending on day of the week, weirdly. So that's still a lot less than what kids are spending on their screens. But one other thing I wanted to point out from that study that's so fascinating to me is the primary screen time use among all ages and both genders is streaming, watching videos, watching television. Kids say they can't live without YouTube. And that's really where I want to turn to you, CJ, because this is what you do every single day. You're working with streaming content. What is it? Like, this is what kids are seeing, and why should parents worry, and how do they manage that? Big question.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, so it's pretty incredible to consider that as early as 2 years old, a kid can actually navigate smart devices to choose the content that they want to watch. And so it can start really, really early. And then the power is in their hands. And because there's just so much content that's out there, they can seemingly watch anything. So what they're watching, it's actually very similar to adults in that it depends on their mood. So kind of most streaming services break it down into 3 different categories. It's exciting and dynamic content. So this is what a lot of parents are familiar with like 6 to 10-year-olds. This is the superhero stuff, the PJ Masks, the Teen Titans Go, the Paw Patrol, that kind of thing. And then you have unwind content, which I think is actually kind of overlooked. Kids can get stressed. Kids can have a lot on their minds. And so they will use content to kind of unwind. Some market research found that about 80% of kids will watch something to unwind before they go to bed. And this is usually like nostalgic or really familiar content. You'll have a 7-year-old go back to Sesame Street because it's familiar and they love it and they want to feel good, just like us. And then you have the aspirational content. This is where YouTube really wins. This is kids that want to, they're aspirational by nature, right? They have their whole lives ahead of them. They're looking forward. So they turn to gamers that they love. They turn to music videos. They turn to dancers. They turn to crafts or celebrities. They go to YouTube to watch these things. So really, I think something to keep in mind is that when kids turn to streaming content, they're turning to that content for a reason. So as adults, it's really important to try and figure out why they are turning to the things that they are turning to. And it might actually reveal a pattern of an unfulfilled need or something that you can help address instead of like ostracizing them for watching a lot of a particular thing. Try to understand why they're turning there.
That's such great advice. And it reminds me, I wrote a piece for Psychology Today a year ago about a class I taught in which the kids told me, this is the 8th graders, that they had observed a suicide on TikTok, believe it or not. And in the chat, they were talking about it. And then the kids were saying, I had to watch Peppa the Pig for an hour afterwards to feel better. So you're right. They go there for comfort. You know, a lot of these kids are home alone. Pam brought up something earlier before we got on the chat that higher screen time really happens in families with lower income, because obviously the parents are working, the kids are at home, it's the babysitter, it's an affordable babysitter. So there's just a lot of dynamics going on there. So Sue, I wanted to turn to you because you really hear the stories from families that are really struggling with this screen time issue. That's sort of where you come in the teenage years. So what are you hearing from families?
Well, especially since the pandemic over the past couple of years, our phones and our inquiries have really gone up. And with the screen time and internet addiction, and the kids have, the soft signs used to be more of our kids are failing, they're not attending classes, signs of depression, anxiety, especially when you try to limit their screen times, or they're starting to withdraw from their favorite activities, not wanting to join in at family functions. But lately, we've seen it escalate to literally property destruction, rage, anger, explosiveness. Kids are like punching holes in walls. Parents can't even think about removing the devices because it literally sets off a firestorm in the house. I mean, I talk to parents almost on a weekly basis that I'm hearing this constantly about the rage and the anger that's going on with these kids. It's really interesting. I talked to a mother last week, and she had this observation that I thought was really, really so spot on. She said, it wasn't the pandemic. It's not the pandemic. What the pandemic did is it took the covers off of it. The pandemic has now exposed this epidemic of screen addiction. And I really think she's right. I mean, I think this has been a growing concern, but the pandemic has really exposed how much time our kids are really spending online. And yes, it has increased by 17%, but I do think that the pandemic has really given us time to realize the mental health challenges that all our kids are now having because of a lot of them spending too much time online. And this is where residential treatment that a lot of them are calling us for has been really helpful, because it's removing these kids from the stressors and the triggers of the home life where they're spending too much time behind the screens.
Interesting. So Pam, what signs should a parent look out for to know that their child needs help?
Well, I would just play devil's advocate here a little bit, Sue, because I'm not sure I agree with your parent, because screen time has gone up because that's the only way kids have been able to connect and developmentally. Their entire task is trying to figure out who they are socially. So I think you can't just say it's one or the other. Teenage depression, all of that was a huge problem even before Facebook, before the internet. So I think we don't want to scare parents into thinking that somehow nasty stuff is coming out of the screen when it's a very complex etiology, right? That kind of rage that you're talking about has been shown to be a product of the frustration with COVID, right? We've been powerless. We've been kept in our houses. We don't know, we're under attack by some invisible, it's kind of like an alien movie. So
Right.
I think it's important for parents to exhale a little bit. That doesn't mean you shouldn't address serious symptoms, so you have to recognize symptoms and figure out what's there, but don't just automatically assume that taking away a phone is going to cure what ails your child, because these things are
That's
very
not it at all.
complex.
Yeah, right.
Well,
No,
yeah, right. No, but parents have a way of hearing, oh my God, screen time without thinking that
Oh, no. That's not
that
it
it's
at
a
all.
very
Yeah,
complex
yeah.
thing.
No, residential treatment is about therapy. And therapy is, these kids need therapy. It's not just about removing the phone. Absolutely not. The kids need help for sure.
Right.
For coping skills to handle, the anger management, stress management, the anxiety that they're struggling with. At the end of the day,
No,
it's really not about the screens. The screens is what they're using as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So what I would say, Diana, to your question, because I kind of went off road there, is that what you recommend with that tech contract is incredibly important, because it allows parents to have an initial conversation and establish baseline and expectations so that you can monitor change.
Yeah. So what should they look for? Like, how do they know they have a problem?
Well, I mean, with a withdrawal, right? And withdrawal from and recognizing that this has been a stressful situation. So parents need to have a little bit of compassion in how they're addressing these symptoms. But withdrawal, as Sue described, a lot of anger that they don't know how to disperse,
Mhm.
Not being interested in doing things they liked, because sometimes